Ohio, on the night everything went wrong. Inside the Maplewood Inn, a two-story motel off the highway, the neon sign flickered in and out, casting a dull red glow over the parking lot. Room 207 was quiet at first, only the hum of the air conditioner and the faint rhythm of music playing through a phone speaker. 32-year-old Ethan Cole sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He wasn't sure what had brought him there that night: loneliness, curiosity, or maybe just the need to feel wanted again. He had broken up with his longtime girlfriend 2 months earlier, and the silence of his apartment had become unbearable. He scrolled through an Escort website earlier that evening and found a profile that caught his attention instantly: Lana Rivers, classy, discreet, unforgettable. Her photos showed a confident woman with dark eyes and a soft smile. She looked older than most, more grounded, and that made Ethan feel safe somehow. He booked her for an hour without thinking twice. When Lana arrived, security footage captured her walking down the hall in a fitted black dress, holding a small clutch. The staff remembered her as polite, quiet, and professional. She had been staying at the motel for 2 days, seeing a few clients and keeping to herself. To everyone around her, she was simply another visitor passing through town. But Lana carried secrets no one in Ridgewater knew. She had moved there recently from Florida, hoping to start over after years of struggling with family rejection and judgment. Transitioning had given her peace, but it also forced her to live carefully, always worried about how people might react if they found out about her past. That fear had followed her everywhere. The first hour between Ethan and Lana seemed uneventful. According to later testimony, they talked, drank, and listened to music. Ethan appeared relaxed, laughing for the first time in months. But something changed suddenly, no one knows exactly how. Detectives later pieced together that a text appeared on Lana's phone that hinted at her former identity. Ethan must have seen it, because what followed was chaos. Neighbors in the next room heard a crash, then muffled shouting. 15 minutes later, Ethan was seen on camera leaving the room with his jacket pulled tight over his head. When hotel staff opened the door, they found Lana lying motionless beside the bed, her makeup smeared, a faint trickle of blood staining the carpet. The police arrested Ethan less than 2 hours later at a rest stop 20 miles away. He sat in his truck, hands shaking, and told officers that he just lost control. He said he felt tricked, that something inside him snapped. But investigators didn't see confusion, they saw rage. The evidence showed no sign of struggle beyond what he caused. It wasn't self-defense. It was murder. Lana's story quickly spread across the country, sparking outrage and grief. She had fled her old life searching for safety, only to be killed for the very thing she had tried to hide. And in that small Ohio motel, under flickering neon lights, 2 lives ended that night, one by violence, and the other by the weight of his own hate. The morning after Lana's death, Ridgewater woke up to flashing lights outside the Maplewood Inn. News traveled quickly in a small town, but few people could believe what had happened. Reporters crowded the parking lot, snapping photos of the yellow tape that surrounded the building. The coroner's van arrived just after sunrise, and by then the story had already spread online. A young woman found dead in a motel room, her client arrested hours later. It sounded like another tragic but familiar case. What no one knew yet was that it would ignite a nationwide conversation about identity, prejudice, and violence. Detective Marilyn Torres arrived on the scene before anyone else. She had seen many brutal cases in her career, but something about this one felt different. The crime scene was cold, clinical, and full of unanswered questions. Lana's phone lay shattered on the floor. Her clutch bag was still zipped, untouched. Nothing had been stolen, not even the cash she kept inside. It was clear from the start that robbery wasn't the motive. Torres studied the room carefully and found a single glass on the nightstand with Ethan Cole's fingerprints. She knew right away this wasn't a random act, it was personal. While investigators processed the evidence, Ethan was being questioned at the county station. He sat in silence, eyes red and swollen, as if he hadn't slept at all. He admitted to meeting Lana, admitted to spending time with her, and admitted that he had snapped after realizing she was transgender. The detectives listened, trying to piece together the timeline, but what stood out most was Ethan's tone. He didn't sound remorseful. He sounded confused, like he was trying to convince himself he had been provoked. When asked why he didn't just leave, he couldn't answer. His lawyer later described it as a crime of panic, but to Torres, it sounded like hatred disguised as shock. Back in Florida, Lana's best friend, Marisol, learned about her death from a news alert on her phone. She recognized the photo immediately and collapsed on the floor. Lana had called her just 2 nights before, excited about saving enough money to move into a better apartment. She had talked about starting a new life where she could be accepted for who she was. Now, that dream was gone. Within days, Lana's social media pages were flooded with tributes from strangers, while others posted cruel comments that revealed how deeply prejudice still ran. Her identity became a topic of debate instead of the focus on her life being taken. In Ridgewater, a small memorial grew outside the motel entrance. People left candles, flowers, and handwritten notes. Some came quietly at night, afraid of being seen supporting a transgender woman. The case divided the town. Some argued that Ethan acted out of shock, others called it what it was, an act of hate. As the investigation continued, Detective Torres found herself haunted by Lana's photo. She wondered how someone so alive could end up as another statistic. The evidence was strong, but proving motive would take more than science. It would require exposing the kind of fear and ignorance that still hid behind closed doors. And in Ridgewater, there were many doors still locked tight. The trial of Ethan Cole began 6 months after Lana's death, in a courthouse that had never seen so much media attention. Satellite trucks lined the street outside, and protesters gathered with signs demanding justice. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and heavy, the air thick with whispers each time Ethan was led into the room. He looked smaller than he had in his mugshot, his hair cut short, his orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on his frame. Across the courtroom sat Lana's family, her mother clutching a framed photo that showed Lana smiling at a beach in Miami, long before she ever came to Ohio. Reporters later said the image captured everything the case represented, a woman who had finally found herself, only to lose everything because someone else couldn't accept it. The prosecution opened with a straightforward argument. Ethan Cole had invited Lana Rivers into that motel room willingly. He had paid for her time, shared drinks with her, and at some point, discovered her transgender identity. Instead of leaving or ending the meeting, he became violent. They presented the autopsy report, showing evidence of a single fatal wound and signs of manual struggle. There was no defensive injury that suggested Lana attacked first. The prosecutor described Ethan's actions as deliberate, calling the killing a split-second decision born from prejudice. Every word echoed through the courtroom, heavy with implication. The defense took a different approach. They painted Ethan as a man overwhelmed by emotion, someone who felt deceived and humiliated. His attorney claimed it was not premeditated, that he had simply lost control in the moment. They called it a reaction, not a crime of hate. The argument stirred murmurs in the audience, but the jury remained silent. What made the case more complex was the lack of clear evidence of planning. Ethan had no history of violence, no record of aggression. To some, that made his actions more tragic, to others, it made them more terrifying, proof that hate could erupt from ordinary people without warning. During the trial, friends of Lana testified about who she was outside her work. They spoke of her kindness, her humor, and how hard she had worked to rebuild her life. One friend described how Lana used to say she wanted to live quietly, that peace was the only thing she ever wanted. When her mother took the stand, her voice trembled as she told the court about the years Lana spent struggling for acceptance, about the day she came out and the day she left home. The jury listened closely, some with tears in their eyes. After 2 weeks of arguments, evidence, and emotional testimony, the closing statements were made. The prosecutor reminded everyone that Lana's truth had not been a weapon, it had been her identity. Ethan's defense tried to emphasize confusion and panic, but the jury's faces stayed unreadable. When they returned after 5 hours of deliberation, the verdict was clear. Ethan Cole was found guilty of second-degree murder. He bowed his head as the sentence was read, 35 years in state prison. For Lana's family, it wasn't enough to bring her back, but it was something resembling justice. And for Ridgewater, it was a reckoning the town would never forget. After the trial ended, Ridgewater tried to move on, but the town was never quite the same. The Maplewood Inn, once just another cheap roadside stop, became a grim landmark that people whispered about but avoided. Room 207 stayed locked for months, curtains drawn, the key marked as unavailable in the front office system. Locals said they could still feel something heavy in the air whenever they passed by, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened. The motel owner eventually sold the property, claiming business had dropped too much to recover. He told reporters that guests kept canceling reservations after learning about the murder. Even when he offered discounts, no one wanted to sleep in a place that had become a symbol of violence and fear. Meanwhile, Lana's name began to travel far beyond Ohio. Activists used her story in rallies and vigils across the country, demanding stronger laws to protect transgender people. Online, hashtags spread with messages of remembrance and anger. Her photo appeared on posters at pride marches in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. For many, she became more than a victim, she became a reminder of how fragile acceptance could be. Journalists wrote articles about her life, about the dangers faced by transgender women in sex work, and about the rising number of hate crimes that went unreported. Lana's story was no longer just hers, it was part of a much larger struggle that others had been fighting for years. Inside prison, Ethan Cole spent most of his time in isolation. The warden placed him in protective custody after threats from other inmates. At first, he refused to speak to anyone, ignoring letters, interviews, and even his own family. Months passed before he agreed to talk to a prison counselor. He said he couldn't stop seeing Lana's face, couldn't stop hearing the sound of her voice in the moments before he lost control. Some people believed his guilt was real, others thought it was just fear of punishment. When journalists asked for an interview, he sent a short handwritten note instead. It said, "I didn't understand who she was, and now I have to live with that forever." The words were printed in several newspapers, but for Lana's family, they offered little comfort. Regret didn't bring back their daughter. Her mother visited Ridgewater one last time a year after the trial. She stood outside the old motel with a bouquet of white lilies, laid them near the steps, and whispered a prayer. No cameras were there, no crowd, just quiet rain falling over the parking lot. That small act of mourning became the final image of Lana's story for many who followed the case. It was the closing of a circle, one that began with violence but ended with remembrance. Even after time passed, people in Ridgewater still spoke her name carefully, as though it carried weight. For some, she was a warning of how quickly fear could destroy a life. For others, she was proof that even in tragedy, truth finds a way to be seen. Years passed, yet the story of Lana Rivers refused to fade. Every November, on the anniversary of her death, activists and friends organized small gatherings to honor her memory. They lit candles and shared stories of who she was before her name became a headline. A mural of her face appeared on the side of a building in downtown Columbus, her eyes painted bright blue, gazing out at passers-by with a mix of strength and sorrow. Beneath it, someone had written, "Let her be remembered for her courage, not her tragedy." The mural became a quiet place of reflection for many, especially those who saw their own struggles mirrored in her life. People who had never met her began to feel like they knew her, like she represented a piece of every person forced to hide their truth out of fear. Ethan Cole's story, on the other hand, took a different path. Inside the walls of Franklin State Prison, time moved slowly. The initial shock of his conviction wore off, replaced by long stretches of silence. Inmates who once saw him as a monster began to forget his name, and he faded into routine, working in the laundry room by day and reading late into the night. He joined a prison education program, studying psychology and religion. The prison chaplain later said that Ethan often asked about forgiveness and whether someone who had taken a life could ever deserve peace. He wrote letters to Lana's family every year, though they never responded. Each letter began the same way: "I wish I could take it back." The prison staff kept copies in his file, and some wondered if he truly felt remorse or if it was just another attempt to ease his own guilt. In Ridgewater, Detective Marilyn Torres continued her work, but Lana's case stayed with her more than any other. She had seen senseless violence before, but something about that night had left a mark. She visited Lana's grave once, quietly and without telling anyone. Standing there, she realized how deeply that one case had changed her, not just as a detective, but as a person. It had forced her to see how fear and misunderstanding could spiral into hate. She began speaking at local community meetings about tolerance, about the small choices that could prevent tragedies like Lana's. Her words didn't always reach open ears, but she spoke anyway. Across the country, laws slowly began to change. Several states introduced stronger hate crime protections, and Lana's name appeared in discussions at city councils and advocacy groups. Each time, her story was retold, sometimes altered, sometimes simplified, but always with the same painful truth at its core. She had trusted someone, and that trust had cost her life. Yet from that darkness came a movement that refused to be silent. Even as new stories of violence emerged, Lana's legacy lingered like a warning and a promise, that one day, living honestly wouldn't be something a person could die for.